Hi, my name is John. Welcome to another edition of History Roadshow. Mary was quite possibly the most unprepared woman ever to become Queen of England. The worst aspect was her naivety. She didn't even know where England was. She was born to Alfonso IV, Duke of Modena in 1658, a small, sleepy town in northern Italy. The town was well known for its calming atmosphere in a profoundly religious area. At 14, Mary had already decided how her life should pan out by joining the Salesian order of nuns, but her father had other plans for his daughter, and it would also do Mary and her faith much better to serve overseas by becoming married to the future King of England. She now had a greater opportunity to not only invest time but change the minds of heretics to the one true faith she believed. The torch of Rome was now on its way to England. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to select all notifications so you never miss any of our videos. And with that said, let's begin today's story. It was agreed and the couple were married by proxy in September 1673. Mary would arrive in November aged 15 to meet her 40-year-old bridegroom, James. But James was so different to his outgoing brother, Charles II. James was more like his father, a quiet, unassuming man who had little in the way of tact. So much so he had been dubbed by Charles's mistress, Nell Gwynn, as Dismal Jimmy. And when Nell threw mud, it usually stuck. However, Mary fell in love. Maybe his Stuart charm won out at the end of the day. Whatever it was, she became a devoted wife. And James wasn't going to complain about this beautiful young Italian that had come into his life. Like his brother, Mary would learn quickly that James also had a particular insatiable appetite for women. These ladies of the court would prove to have far more influence over Mary's husband in the future than she could have imagined. Arabella Churchill was the flavour of the week at this time. She was the daughter of Dorset Squire Sir Winston Churchill, and through her brother John Churchill and his extraordinary wife Sarah, she would be brought to court. By the time James had met Mary for the first time, Arabella had already produced 4 sons for him. However, Arabella's star status was now starting to wane, and James' eyes were once again wide open to new prey, this time in the form of Catherine Sedley. There was little Mary could do, and like her predecessor Catherine of Braganza, she went with the flow, although always trying to get her husband to stop his wicked ways. Mary would come under the intense gaze of Protestant followers in and out of the court. She was unpopular to the point effigies of her were burnt, but overall Mary felt safe within the confines of her house, and with James almost by her side, what other worries could she have? Over time, Mary settled down, and the time now seemed right to do her duty and start producing children. Between 1675 and 1683, she would sadly have 3 miscarriages, but gave birth to 5 children, although they all died in infancy. In 1678, her secretary Edward Coleman had been apprehended. The so-called Popish plot came to light, in which it was suggested a group had the intention to poison King Charles. However, no one believed he could do such a thing, and the eyes of suspicion fell on Mary. When Charles died in 1685, power would pass to James. Peace wouldn't last long though, and in June the Duke of Monmouth, with support of William of Orange, landed in the West Country. But Monmouth was beaten heavily, and just 1 month later, James and Mary held their coronation. Mary's popularity was still low even though she was now Queen. She introduced new ladies of a Catholic order back into court, and installed a Catholic chapel at St James's Palace. Mary had always been pleasant and alluring until her crowning, but now maybe power had gone to her head. She refrained from the charm and wit once talked about, becoming more regal and even aloof to her subjects. Mary now insisted to James that his mistress Catherine be sent away. He did, but quite possibly felt a little disgruntled by this request. However, a few short months later, Catherine reappeared, and life went back to normal, and it seemed James had a skip in his step once again. Although Catherine may be back, she never regained her previous authority, and the affair this time around was far more discreet. However, in the background, James had upset his court by alienating anyone who didn't follow the Catholic ways. Yeah, the country, never mind the court,
was in no mood to go back to those ways.
Mary had continued to try and gain her husband an heir, but nothing happened. In 1687 she went to Bath and took the waters, hoping they would have some effect on her. Joyous news broke upon her return, and she fell pregnant. But when good news happens, you know it wouldn't be long before bad news arrives, with James around. In 1688 James had issued his brother's declaration of indulgence aimed at Catholics and dissenters, but 7 of his bishops refused to carry out his order. All were arrested and placed in the Tower, but released later due to massive public support. James wasn't for the first time making a complete mess of his monarchy.
On the 1st of July, Mary went into labour and gave birth to a son. James was so thrilled he picked up the baby and ran through Whitehall Palace, shouting "Make way for the Prince of Wales," but he was so far from the truth. The government had set their sights on putting up with James just throughout his reign, but no way they were going to have another Catholic leader. The message was sent to William of Orange to come across the Channel and assume the throne of England. To make matters worse, rumours spread that Mary had not given birth and someone else had smuggled the baby into her room. It suggested most of the stories emanated from Princess Anne, who was jealous of her stepmother. But this didn't stop Mary, and she went on to have a daughter, Louise, just 4 years later. But by now the chances of any of their children taking up the reins of a Catholic kingdom were merely pipe dreams.
William of Orange landed and slowly now made his way to London. James sent Mary and her baby to France, and he would soon swiftly follow her into exile. Louis XIV would now take care of the couple to the point of being very generous, presenting them with a palace at Saint-Germain-en-Laye. And although James still had aspirations to get back to England and regain his position, in 1690 he attempted to invade Ireland but was entirely routed by William, only to return after a bruising defeat to France. Mary had now had enough of the fighting and political views. She would spend long periods in solitude at a Salesian convent in Paris, the exact order she had planned to join as a child.
William III was still without an heir, and although Mary had been pregnant 18 times, none of the children survived. William asked Louis XIV if James stopped his ongoing claim to have the throne in England, and William would pass it to his son, also called James. If there ever was a time to be quiet though, this was it. But Mary opened up, declaring that "I would rather see my son dead than possessing the crown to the prejudice of his father." This was quite possibly the only fateful contribution Mary made, which ensured the final days of the Stuart dynasty, and nothing more was said of the proposition.
In England, Parliament announced a new beginning, creating the Act of Settlement. In the event of death to Queen Anne, her crown would pass to the Protestant Sophia and her descendants, and no future English king would be allowed to marry a Catholic. Both Mary and James had just deprived their son of his rightful inheritance. James never saw the bill passed. He died of a stroke on the 16th of September 1701. Mary was left with egg on her face. She realised how foolish she had been by her comment, but it was now too late.
Mary would eventually settle down once again at the French court. She watched her children grow, and it seemed that her later years would end happily. Her son James would continue to knock on the door to try and become king. If not of England, then he'd try Scotland, but that's another story. When Louis died, Mary once again felt threatened. Louis had always supported her and her family. Still now under the leadership of the new Louis XV, he had little time for any of the Stuarts, to the point of making it clear he didn't want Mary's son James within a stone's throw of France.
Louis did support Mary, but her once peaceful existence was now thwarted by Jacobite refugees, all demanding but not getting anything in the way of generosity the last king gave. Mary succumbed eventually. She had little in the form of effects anymore. Her once glorious wardrobe was bare, and she would only find solace in her religion. In May of 1718, Mary contracted a cold which unfortunately turned into pneumonia, and she had passed away within a week, aged 59. Mary was buried at her favourite place, the Salesian convent, alongside the heart of her husband, James II. So was Mary's father right in sending his daughter overseas to marry a man 25 years older than herself? And can any blame be pinned on Mary for her family's eventual downfall and the glorious revolution? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again soon.